Tonight, in an on-call special edition, we look at the tragic results of child abuse and sexual predators, the signs to look for, and steps to take to protect your family. The doctors are on call now.
Funding for this program is provided in part by
Avera is a proud sponsor of On Call on South Dakota Public Television.
And by the South Dakota Foundation for Medical Care, the Medicare Quality Improvement Organization for South Dakota. Additional funding provided by Dakota Care, the Brookings Health System, Regional Health, the South Dakota American College of Physicians, and Swiftel Communications. Closed captioning for On Call is provided by the generous support of Avera, the Brookings Health System, and Fishback Financial Corporation.
There's the valve.
All of them together.
And which was healthier, the yogurt and the bagel?
All right, I'm going to start by measuring the size of it.
You could also add grilled chicken to this recipe.
Blow hard, blow, keep pushing.
And try to position your head.
Pull red handle to open bag.
Welcome to this on-call special edition. Penn State assistant football coach Jerry Sandusky faces more than 50 counts of sexual abuse involving now 10 boys over a 12-year period. But this sexual abuse scandal hasn't ended at Penn State. In the weeks following, there has been an avalanche of accusations of abuse, as well as many opinions about this topic throughout the country. Headlines include sex abuse claims prompt look at youth sports culture, former AAU leader accused of child sexual assault, YMCAs seek community help against child sex abuse. Penn State is encouraging people to report sexual assault and relationship violence through hotline and many, many more. Thus, there have been renewed concerns about sexual predators, especially when we think about how we like to encourage our children in many sports and non-sports youth programs throughout schools and outside school. We depend on and trust coaches, teachers, youth leaders, spiritual leaders who have ready access to our youth. Indeed, most professional and volunteer coaches, teachers, provide wonderful and exemplary mentoring to our kids, and their gift to society is immeasurable. Yet a very small percentage of these people can destroy it for the good ones by abusing our children. Certainly, it would be too bad if this increased concern for such abuses would reduce or compromise the programs available to teach our children the value of teamwork. Leadership skills need to be taught by example, but we have a dilemma in this country, and we need to address it. Questions that should be discussed tonight should not only include the ramifications of abuse on an individual, but also how to cope with the abuse that has occurred. In addition, we should learn how to identify risky situations, how to protect our youth and ourselves from bad actors out there. We have invited experts in the field to advise us tonight. Tony Vaca, physician, Avera psychiatric hospitalist. Wallace Jackmon, a university psychology associate, a psychologist, a clinical psychologist. And Nancy Free, Child's Voice area of expertise, pediatrics and child abuse. Thank you all for joining us. Let's just talk about who we are and how we came to this. Nancy, you've been involved with this area for how long, and how is this happening to you?
I was in general pediatric practice for 15 years or so, and then the last 10 years or so of my practice has been at Child's Voice, which is a center for evaluation of children who are possible victims of abuse or neglect. I kind of ended up there serendipitously, but now that's really my full-time practice.
You're full-time with the Child's Voice?
Yes.
And that is primarily with abused children, but other things?
We have two things that we do. We have a foster care clinic, so we provide evaluation for children placed in out-of-home care. And then our primary focus is evaluating children, both in our clinic and at the hospitals in town, who are possible victims of abuse or neglect.
Okay, yes. And you are a clinical psychologist who, Wallace, who is involved with adults primarily, but you've been involved with adolescents as well.
Yes, actually I cut my teeth working for the state of South Dakota in Child Protective Services, so I investigated child abuse and neglect in my early years. And without dating myself, I'll just say it was several years ago. And then I worked for the Mental Health Center, and I typically worked with children and adolescents and moved towards more adults in about the last 10 years or so through Avera.
Okay. And so, Wallace, for your experience, would you say that you're involved with this kind of case 10% of the time, or?
I would say some type of either abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, trauma. At least 25 to 30% of the cases I see would have some aspect of that in those cases.
Okay. And Tony, you're a psychiatrist. You were here in South Dakota. You've left. You came back to South Dakota. Hurrah! And you primarily are doing hospital care. So right now you're involved with very sick people who need to be hospitalized for psychiatric problems. Your involvement with adult patients, what involvement does a child abuse scenario affect your patients? And is that a large part of what happens with the adults that you care for?
Well, a very substantial part, and I will say right now that I only see the adult population. But a lot of people who come in as adults have had very unfortunate and emotionally traumatic experiences of youth that they have carried with them for a long time. And these very tough, private emotions, they brew over time, and it really can impact relationships and their ability to work and their own physical health and the kind of choices they make. So we certainly see it in the adult population.
You know, people talk about post-traumatic stress syndrome in the warriors who come back from the overseas. How much of adult illness might be related to the trauma of childhood? Before I ask you to, invite all to jump in on that. I want you to think about it, okay? But we invite you to call any and all questions concerning abuse and sexual predators. Your identity will be kept confidential, and your questions will be answered as well as we can on this forum. The number is 1-888-376-6225. Again, that is 1-888-376-6225. And we invite your questions. We need your questions. Anonymous questions would be great. Thanks so much. Well, let's start with you, Nancy.
The trauma of childhood certainly carries over into adulthood. You know, there's been several studies, adverse childhood experiences, and certainly child sexual abuse is an adverse childhood experience, is associated with all kinds of adult problems, both emotional and psychological, as well as physical. And so this problem in childhood potentially can affect a child for the rest of their life.
Well, certainly it affects some of my patients who come in with back pain or stomach trouble.
High blood pressure, heart problems.
You know, so that it's a physical response as well. Is that your sense?
I'd completely agree, and I think one word that we'll see or discuss throughout this conversation will be the issue of trust. Whether it be that it's a trusted perpetrator, the person is usually a person of trust, and it affects that person's ability to trust in relationships from that point forward. And so I think that's one of the aspects you will see permeate from a problematic standpoint through childhood to adult.
Right. Trust is all about what adults should be trustable to these children we're raising. Tony, any comment?
The violation of trust is just it produces an impact that lasts many years, and it's a wound that it's hard sometimes to articulate how this really feels on the inside, but often though the victim just feels like they were to blame.
Yeah. The event that motivated us to produce this special edition of On Call was, of course, the events of Penn State and Jerry Sandusky. We asked Athletic Director Justin Sell of South Dakota's largest Division I university athletic program for comment.
I think the tough part of this one is, we deal with issues every day, and I think that's common for any larger organization, and you become practiced in those areas, and certainly I think most of us emphasize the prevention of those issues. And so how do you create an environment that people feel comfortable talking about it, because that's usually when the problems come up before they become a major problem. A lot of us aren't equipped to deal with the issues you're talking about and the things that have come up recently. No one sends you for training in those areas. It's more like every other issue that we deal with. Can you analyze the problem, and can you get the right people at the table, make sure you got your facts straight, and then can you get the professionals that know how to deal with it, the right information, and then let them do their due diligence. That's the key piece to the whole thing. I can't possibly be an expert in all of those areas, but I certainly know how to link to those people that are experts to get people support or get them help or take care of problems. I mean, that's the interesting part about this whole Penn State scandal is I think it's so mind-boggling because people can't wrap their hands around, first, what's been described as what took place, and secondly, the fact that seemingly no one did anything about it for a very, very long period of time. That's what makes it hard for people to really rectify what's going on there. And, you hope that that's an isolated incident, to their campus and not somewhere else. But it also gets people talking. And hopefully from that, people get better at how they deal with situations or issues on their campuses.
It's an interesting thing tonight in the Brookings Register front page. We have a comment. Can you see it there? Police arrest for man for sexual contact with 3-year-old girl. I mean, it's here. It's let's see right there. And so the issue is that it's everywhere right now. In fact, in particular, and that's why we've done that. I am going to take the first question here. Is a caller who said niece was abused by stepfather, 3.5 to 14 years of age during that time, and is now an adult. She married with daughter. Is her child likely to be abused by the original abuser if that person is around? Nancy?
Well, I think there's certainly the risk is very high. It depends on the circumstances. Certainly, with that mom's history, it's very unlikely that this child will ever have any unsupervised time with the stepfather. And so that particular child may be safe, but you also wonder who else does this stepfather have access, does he still have access to other children?
So, I mean, now we've decided, and let's say we've stamped this person as an abusive person. Is that person a bad person? Is that person to be forever thrown in a junk pile? Or what do you do with that person? Wallace?
Well, I think there's a continuum of perpetration, and so you have to take that on a case-by-case basis. Just to piggyback on what you were talking about regarding access and to answer that question, the also question would be whether there's opportunity for that alleged perpetrator to act upon abusing that child. And so I think that's something you would want to look at as well. Throwing them in the garbage pile, I believe so there's a good percentage of folks that can be rehabilitated, but it really depends upon the circumstance.
Well, the thing that strikes out to me when I listen to that is that we're talking about a pattern of abuse lasting over 10 years, starting with a child that was 3.5 years old.
Right.
And so this certainly was not a one-time incident. It had happened over several years, and so obviously we're very concerned about that perpetrator's ability to perpetrate again.
Right.
So what percentage of adults out there, I mean, now we're saying, okay, there are bad people in our world, but what we think is that many people are not perpetrators. They're good people, but now we're afraid of all coaches. We're afraid of all ministers and priests, and I mean, they went into the field because they had access to our children. How do you reassure people? And Nancy, you're going to say.
Well, I think that it's very important to recognize that, again, most people who work with children are not people that hurt children. I think there's things you can look for that are red flags. If there's an adult in an organization that always wants alone time with a child, that wants that one-on-one, certainly one-on-one time is important, but if that's really what you see one particular adult, that's a red flag. If most organizations have now developed keys to keeping children safe. They want 2 adults present. They want, windows and doors, those kinds of things.
Right.
And for example, I do some coaching on the side at the YMCA, and that's one of the safeguards they have in place is they have a screening procedure through the child protection or through the database. And I believe that's just for the state of South Dakota. I don't know if that's nationwide, but I know that's one of those procedures that is put in place to make sure we don't have predators out there coaching our children.
And if you're a teacher or a minister or a priest, that you have time with your children, these kids, that you want to make safeguards so that you don't end up with one person. You have a group you're together with. Protect yourself so that you don't get accused. It is a terrible experience to be the victim of sexual abuse. It is compounded when the abuser is a trusted family member, and it can be difficult to talk about even many years later.
I experienced that for about 6 years. I would call it molestation, inappropriate touching of myself and the person who was my biological father. And so it went on. I was always very ashamed about it. And yet there is that really creepy level that, of course, the touching feels good on that physical plane, but of course just all the shame and how each of us knows it's so wrong. It started one night. My mom had been really glad to take a second job since she was, she worked at home, so she was out of the house at night, and who knows why, but as a 12-year-old, I still went to her when I got up in the middle of the night to use the restroom, and then she would put me back to bed. And one night I did that, and it was my dad, and he invited me into his bed, or it was their bed, but she was at work. And I had recently had a mole removed from right between my, just on my chest at that time. I didn't even have any breasts yet or anything. And he wanted to look at it. And then it just kind of progressed from there. My first reaction was horror and shock. But it was also compliant and go along with it. And this does not feel right. What is going on? That would start the very first layer, of secrecy, or the very first instance of denying oneself their feelings or one's sexuality. This is my dad doing it, and I guess it's all right. He used those, the classic words, don't tell anyone, this is a secret. I want to teach you about sex education. And when I got into counseling about 10 years later, I found out those are just real characteristics of a sexual predator.
I have to say that was the most courageous thing I think I've seen in a long time, to open up like that. Thank you so much for your gift of a heartfelt story that would be hard to say. But it always makes me think about sexual abuse being something that seems to be perpetrated by a male upon a child, a female child or a male child. Is that always the case?
Always? No, certainly the preponderance of sexual offenders are men. When you look at child abuse in general, men do more sexual abuse, women do more neglect. But there are women who sexually abuse children as well.
Yeah, we're seeing much more disclosure of that in the media as well regarding some of the female teachers that have been abusing male students. And I believe in the past that those reports simply weren't made either because of the stereotypical boys will be boys and he's lucky that this happened, or if it's a male teacher or a male coach, that the boys may be thought of that maybe I'm homosexual or maybe I was asking for it or something along that lines. So I just believe we haven't seen as much reporting from boys, but yes, it occurs both ways, but the preponderance of reports have been males on females.
Any comment about that, Tony?
No, I think they answered that really quite well.
They did, didn't they? Let's talk about bullying, because I think this really ties in. My sense is that this is an adult bully who's bullying upon a child who's defenseless. Is there any component about that? What do you think about that, Tony?
Well, who are we talking about? Are we talking about the victim or the perpetrator?
Well, I'm talking about the perpetrator being the bully.
Well, we certainly know that kind of one of the core issues involving that perpetrator, and a lot of the time, is the feeling of inadequacy and how they need to obtain an air of power and authority and command respect through the obvious physical and emotional control of their victim. And we think of them as being very outgoing, controlling, drill sergeant-like, when really, on the inside, they have some pretty significant issues regarding a lack of regarding feelings of inferiority.
A lack of confidence.
A lack of confidence.
Yeah. Any comment about this?
I might piggyback on that by saying that grooming aspect of some perpetrators, there's generally a progressive stages where they already are in a position of trust, so where they may start grooming the patient or grooming the victim, to where it typically isn't just a one-time sexual perpetration jumping out of the bushes type of thing.
Yeah.
It's usually a slower progressive kind of thing.
Now, excuse me, Nancy, but do the courts take that, Wallace, and try to elicit that information as a way to maybe extend a prison sentence or I mean, do they really look for that in the courts as far as the...
I believe so. And maybe
I think they want a full history. But I think back to the original question in bullying, I think for adults who are victims of sexual assault or sexual abuse, certainly the bullying is huge. I think for children, I think there's several subclasses and certainly overlap, but because I think there's people who are pedophiles, that's truly about sexual gratification. And then I think there's people that it's very much a power and control issue, and then there's some overlap.
A power and control issue. Yeah. I sense that, I mean, a lot of that might be, why does this happen? Why does it get started? And then once this is a person who's done this, then we have to always protect our children from them. And I guess the answer to that is yes. Response to that? Yes. Why do people abuse others this way? What do they look for when they search for a victim? And is there anything that we can do to reduce the chance that we will be abused?
For example, if we look at this from a point of view of Little Red Riding Hood. You remember Little Red. Okay, she shows up, and in our standard thing, we pretty well know that Grandma, who gets eaten by the wolf, is the victim. Little Red's approaching victim status real fast. Our perpetrator, our persecutor, is the wolf. And then our rescuer that shows up is the woodsman. Right? No problem on this one. So we take a look in here, if we look at it from the wolf's perspective, he's been sucked in by a victim, and becomes a victim, and what we see as a rescuer is actually the wolf's persecutor. So the roles are kind of interrelated. And this is possibly an explanation for why we see so many of the people that are victimizing youth as people who were once victimized themselves as youngsters. The roles are interchangeable. You can go from being a victim to being a persecutor to being a rescuer, and all the roles, anybody can play them. We know what they are. What they did on this was research in prison where they would show a film of people walking by on the street, and they would ask these people who had been convicted of violent crimes to pick the easy mark, pick the person that would be the best victim. And they were remarkably consistent in picking the same people on the videos, totally consistent on it. They couldn't say why. It was apparently some sort of an intuitive process that they knew what they were picking, but they couldn't describe what features they were looking for. So they took the same films, marked the people that were the victims, and they found that they moved at a different rate than the rest of the people. Their arm swings might be exaggerated, tended to shuffle the feet, drag a toe, and there are a number of things in the posture that actually made a victim stand out to these predators that were in prison. I think we could actually train people a little bit in walking more confidently. Sandusky obviously likes kids. It's a sick joke when you deal with these people, but they do genuinely like kids. He has found a way to bring many of them in, and he's taking his time. Probably the biggest thing we can work at is developing a belief that not everybody is a nice guy. We have to have kids that are a little bit skeptical. If you're out there in a world where you have mountain lions, it's a good idea to know that the mountain lion is a predator instead of just a big cat. I think we need to keep a certain amount of skepticism, a healthy skepticism in our kids. And I think that's probably where our real future of studying the relationships between victims and the perpetrators, the predators, really exists, is where we can take it and change them so we cut down the opportunity, cut down the risk. We won't solve it, but we may protect a fifth of the people.
So it's interesting, he talked about the fact that there are people who are victims. I mean, they look like victims. They get picked out as victims. They walk like a victim, and they get hit. Now, is that any part of what your training is or your thoughts are? Nancy?
As we look at prevention, we know that certain children are at higher risk. And certainly the child who's not nurtured at home, who doesn't have a good sense of self, teenagers who are looking for love in all the wrong places really can become victims because they don't have that strong sense and the sense that it's okay to say no to people. And they're very easily groomed because anyone who gives them good attention, kindness, they're more willing to welcome them into their lives.
They're hungry for that.
Hungry.
And you may see that from kids that may have disabilities. They would be likely victims, or a child that is singled out or doesn't have as many friends or is more of a loner, may have some physical problems. Those folks tend to be higher risk of being victimized. And you may see that with adults as well, that they may be higher target of being abused.
Well, I guess the first thought I have is it still doesn't make it right for that person to be victimized. Right. And it's somebody has to victimize somebody for that person to be a victim. And so, there's all the childhood element and all this, but it's still, we're talking about, in this case, let's say adults that should know better.
Right.
Yeah. I always think about what he was talking about, the way people walk, and if you can walk with confidence, you're less likely to be victimized. I sense that that's an important way of presenting yourself if you're going to be interviewing for a job, to puff up yourself and fill yourself with confidence and present yourself in a confident way. I think we should all be doing that a little bit more, but I guess maybe that's another story. What is it that you think, now we talked about the victims, what do you think sets up the perpetrator? I mean, that begs the question again. Why did that perpetrator become one? And is it the child that was victimized that grows up to become the perpetrator?
Not necessarily. A majority of children that are abused do not perpetrate, do not sexually abuse. Unfortunately, a majority of folks that are perpetrators have been perpetrated on or have some type of abuse in their background. But I guess I want to make sure that folks understand that a great majority of people that are abused do not abuse other people.
Comment on that, Tony?
Well, we don't know for certain. I mean, really, each case is individualistic. There may be certain reasons why. There could be, a big factor, too, that is really commonly associated with this is the use of alcohol or illicit drugs, and also in that culture. So, there's also psychosocial factors that influence all of this as well.
Nancy?
Absolutely. Certainly there's certain drugs, meth in particular, that really puts people at risk of perpetrating because it influences their libido and destroys all boundaries. But back to something Tony said earlier, certainly we have to understand that anybody who's been victimized, it's not their fault.
Right.
Period. Whether they're adult or a child, it is always, nobody asked for this. Some people talk about children dressing provocatively. Give me a break.
Come on, it's not their.
Right. No, it's not about the child. This is an adult problem.
Right. How much of that? How important is that point that we should make? I mean, should we say that a little bit louder and a couple times? Wallace.
I think that's extremely important that we don't get into a victim-blaming kind of mentality. I remember one case in particular that I was seeing a group of children at Volunteers of America, and one of the girls had been raped, gang raped, by a bunch of boys at a party. And she was about 12 years old at the time, and these were 17-year-olds. And there were some girls in the group with me, and they were blaming the girl because she had showed up at the party with a bikini on. And so they thought, well, maybe if you wouldn't have shown up with this bikini, that wouldn't have happened. And so I think sometimes we get into looking at the victim.
It wasn't those guys. It wasn't their fault.
Right.
It was her fault. She was egging him on.
Right.
I've heard that story before. It's good to know that organizations that are designed to teach and promote our children are taking steps to minimize the opportunity that the Penn State events will be played out in South Dakota. South Dakota State University Athletic Director Justin Sell shared some of the policies and processes that are used to guard against abuse of student athletes.
The NCAA has changed a lot as an organization over the last 20 years. One. Two, the Division I move, there are certainly more rules and regulations and things that you have to follow. The NCAA rule book's pretty thick, and it covers a wide variety of things. But these issues, a lot of them fall under what they call the life skills program. And so a lot of that is really an educational program and how we support our student athletes, because you can deal with things like alcohol and drug abuse, you can deal with diets, nutrition, obviously some the cases that we've been talking about, there's all those different areas or issues that you're dealing with. And so we do a lot of programming. Probably once a month we have some sort of program for our student athletes to be involved in. And we take it as far as career opportunities and resume building and interview skills. I mean, there's all those different components. So that's really been put together by the NCAA in the life skills arena. Allows us to have those conversations, hopefully on the front side, so you can prevent things from happening. But I think it also helps you establish your plans of action, that if something were to occur, here's the things that we do, or here's the steps that we follow. First and foremost, I think we have a great environment or culture here. We have some really good people, and in the hiring process, that's important to us, especially if you're talking about a coaching position and you're dealing with young people. We do a lot of work with, obviously, following up with reference calls. We do background checks. We can do all of those things to make sure that we're hiring the right individuals to work with people here on campus. Our coaches work with kids in camps all the way up to, obviously, their student athletes, and so they're around young people all the time. Their ability to be a good role model in a variety of ways and areas is important to us, and so that is absolutely part of our process. And then we spend a lot of time educating, as we've talked about. We have meetings with each of the sport programs at the beginning of the year with our administrators. We go through all those things. Our coaches do that individually as well. And I'm really proud of the environment that we have here at South Dakota State.
Well, that's important that we're making those efforts. There's efforts that can be done. If they're not being done at your college, your high school, your school, your church, synagogue, then you need to make those efforts to make sure that they are done. But, one of the things that I'm thinking about is the most important thing we can do to protect our kids. How do we protect them? I mean, our children now, okay, outside the college football team, but our kids, how do we protect them? What can we do first? Nancy?
I think nurture them in any way. Let them know that there's nothing that they can do or say that will make you stop loving them. And so that whatever they might happen to them, they can first of all talk about it. and then that it's okay to say no to people. So it's lots of those pieces that begin very early.
But how can you teach them to say no to people but not say no to me, honey? You can't say no to me. You must eat your broccoli. You know what I mean?
Well, and I think kids can understand some of those differences, but I think it's how you teach a child to eat their broccoli. I think it even starts even that early. What is your parenting style?
Yeah, Tony.
Well, you protect them by sometimes really as a parent protecting your child from themselves and putting themselves into precarious situations they may not be aware of. Notorious would be internet and the ways that the children very privately can get away and start contacting people. They have no idea how old they are, what their motives are. It can be an allure. Internet, and I think also clothing too. I think that certainly is a way we as parents can also help protect our kids and the clothes, some of the clothes they wear, and
you can say
the
no
friends, the friends they are hanging out with, and making sure if they do go out, we ask them who, and maybe have a parent on the other side that we know they're going to be at. So I mean, there's certainly ways we can try to protect as parents.
Right before I say anything more, I want you to know that give us a call at 1-888-376-6225. That's 3-8s-376-6225. Give us your calls. We'd love your comments. Wallace.
The only thing I'd add to that is we want to have that open communication. Those lines need to be open from the beginning as parents with our children. Otherwise, if we're not talking with them about their grades or their friends or their teachers, very seldom are they going to disclose something as serious as sexual abuse.
You know, as a parent, I find, actually as a human being, my sexuality is a very private thing. It's kind of hard to expose it. It's hard to talk about sex. I mean, it's funny in this world of sex on TV and sex on everywhere you look that actually many of us are afraid to talk about it. We don't want to talk about it. Particularly don't talk about it with our children or our parents.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, think about the worst thought in your mind when you're growing up was your parents making love. Oh my God. So, I mean, maybe being able to talk about sexuality with your family, although you worry, okay, now is this sexual abuse by verbal way? So help me, Nancy.
Well, no, I mean, sexual abuse, instructing our kids, talking to our children about private parts and private parts staying private is very different from exposing our children to pornography.
Yes.
You know? I mean, there's certainly, people recognize those differences. I think it's important. You know, only about 30% of parents actually talk to their children about sexual abuse or that possibility. And it's, again, as you said, it's hard to bring that up just at the breakfast table if you haven't built a culture where you can talk about other things. It is hard. It is awkward
to
talk with our children about sex.
Right.
But it's important.
It's so important. We talk to them about cleaning their room every day.
That's
we should
right.
talk to them about these other issues. What should you do if you suspect that a family member or a neighbor is the victim of abuse or is an abuser? There are many services available to deal with the effects of sexual and physical abuse. Some are national, some local, some are state-level agencies.
The Department of Social Services investigates allegations of abuse or neglect by parents, guardians, or custodians. If the allegation is criminal in nature, law enforcement would assist in those allegations as well. When cases are assigned, the alleged victim, the caretakers, and the alleged perpetrator are interviewed. Based on the information collected in those interviews, decisions are made. The state's attorney may be contacted. Child advocacy centers may also be utilized in the forensic interviewing of children. Any physician, counselor, teacher, child care provider, police officer, parole officer, these are the types of professionals that are mandatory reporters. Failure to not make a report when you're a mandatory reporter can be classified as a misdemeanor. People like relatives, neighbors, friends, any community member, they are not bound by the law, but they would certainly be encouraged to make a report of abuse or neglect if they suspected that. If somebody suspects child abuse or neglect or has a safety concern related to a child, they should contact their local law enforcement or their local child protection services immediately. If a child has any sort of suspicious injury, mark, or bruise, that would be a grounds to make a report. If they express fear of the home, if they disclose any type of abuse or neglect, those would be the grounds to make a report. I would say you can't judge a book by the cover, and anytime you have that suspicion, you need to make a report. There's professionals that are trained on how to interview children and ask the right questions. This law means that anyone who is making a report regarding child abuse in good faith cannot be held liable for that, civilly or criminally. The reporting party may be contacted by Child Protection Services or law enforcement to gather more information. If the case went to court, they may be summoned by the court to testify as to the knowledge that they have regarding that alleged abuse or neglect. Don't assume that other people have made a report. If you witness something that causes you grounds to suspect that child abuse or neglect is occurring in a home, you need to be responsible to make that report immediately to Child Protection Services or law enforcement.
You see how serious this is. I mean, we're talking law enforcement, we're talking child protection agency, we're talking losing our children, we're talking about terrible things that could happen. This is a powerful and important topic. Tony, before we get back to how we can clue into a child that maybe it might be happening to that child, we talked about the computer. How can I protect my kid from getting into the computer? I mean, you know, they're ahead of me. I'm in Stoneville, USA. You know, I mean, I'm way back.
Brookings, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, it's good to put the computer, the family computer, in the middle of the family place, in a kitchen or in a public place instead of somewhere more private. It's always good to sometimes maybe bring in a consultant who knows about these how children and how teenagers are crafty and how they use their computers. My wife and I went to one about close to a month ago, maybe less than that. Very educational about just different programs and different ways to avoid being victimized on the computers. I mean, so getting a consultant that can be very helpful. But you also have to worry about the cell phones too, because a lot of those are computer savvy, and you can address the internet right on them.
Yeah. Wallace.
Piggyback on the cell phone, I think some parents believe that the kids have the right to have a cell phone, but if they're abusing it or they're not allowing you to look at the text messages, I mean, especially if you're paying for that cell phone bill, you have every right to monitor that. And so I would just caution parents on feeling as if that child has 100% access and use of that phone all of the time.
Yeah. Well, and it's important to tell our kids, you know, talk to them about what pictures they take and what pictures they send. You know, it's not appropriate to send pictures of body parts, but sometimes our kids, you know, their rational thinking brain matures last. And so it's important sometimes to be very concrete in the instructions that we give them.
Very quick, so how do we have a clue that there might be something happening in a child? I mean, do we have a clue that abuse is occurring? What clues might we have?
Well, some would be changes in behavior, you know, any extreme changes in behavior and their mood, maybe in their school performance deteriorating, perhaps changes in friends or loss of friends, some isolation.
Children who are very quiet, who become more demonstrative in their behaviors, or the opposite. Mm-hmm. You know, kids who are different emotions, you know, changes. And certainly adolescence in particular is a time of great change. And not every adolescent who's having changes is being sexually abused. But certainly you have to understand your child, and if they seem out of the ordinary to you, I think it's worthwhile talking to somebody.
Yeah.
You know, in so many ways it really looks like that the child, maybe at this point, young adult, is really trying to tell that person that something's happening, and they're giving that, you know, their family, their friends, subtle clues, and it's just good just to be awake and alert and pay attention to them.
Mm-hmm. Well, but the other thing that's really important is some children don't have those changes, and so sometimes when we talk to families and you ask about that, no, we didn't see anything. Some kids are just really able to internalize that, but you know it's going to show up later.
No clue. But it's going to happen later. There's going to be pain and suffering that child will have later. Someone called and said, define sexual abuse of children. What is the definition? Nancy.
Sexual abuse of children covers quite a spectrum. It is a sexual act performed by an adult or a child who is older and in a position of power that involves either a sexual act, sexual contact, or things like showing a child pornography, having a child witness other people's sexual acts, just anything of a sexual nature that involves children with a person who has power over them.
Right. Now, I mean, that's not to say that a hug or you know, when is a dad who has a daughter or a son show comfort and caring without that, oh, is this too much? Or so tell me, help me with that.
Well, I think we all know when we receive hugs that don't feel comfortable, and when we give something. I mean, I think there's a huge difference between a fatherly hug and a fatherly grope.
Okay, fatherly grope. Yep. And the whole community can join in when we're working to protect the youngest and most vulnerable among us. In Brookings, the high school improv team performed skits for third graders to talk with them about good and bad touch and give them the information and tools they need to help them deal with the inappropriate behavior by adults in their lives.
Hi, I'm Louise. I'm a third grader. I have a secret that I'm afraid to tell.
Sorry.
Oh, looks like you win again, Elliot.
Yeah, I'm kind of not having fun with this game anymore.
We could play something else.
Yeah, wait, when are my parents coming home?
Oh, they won't be home for a long time.
Okay, cool. Well, I have Monopoly, but that has a lot of numbers in it. Candyland! I love Candyland.
You picked the game last time. Maybe you should let me pick a game this time.
Okay.
For this game, you have to take your clothes off.
I don't think I'm gonna like this game.
Okay, Elliot, you can trust me.
No, I think we should play a different
Elliot,
game.
it's fine. All you have to do is take your clothes off.
No.
Do you want me to tell your parents you've been bad? Stop! Stop! Well, I guess Elliot knows how I feel. I think I'm ready to tell my secret. I have this Uncle Matt. He's my favorite uncle, and my parents went off to a date and let me stay home and watch movies all day. So he came over just to hang out with me. And I'm so excited to see him. Yay, Uncle Matt! He brought over popsicles, the cherry ones. They are my favorite. And we played some games and we watched my favorite movie, Winnie the Pooh. And then we sat down on the couch for a little while, because I beat him and sorry. And then he put his arm around my shoulder. It felt kind of awkward at first, but then I was kind of okay with it. And then he put his hand up my shirt, and then he started putting his other hand down my pants. I was really scared. And then he said,
"Remember, this is our little secret."
I have a secret, and I'm afraid to tell.
So back in the original writing, that was the challenge. How do we deal with this very sensitive topic where they can know the truth about it and be informed without scaring them to death? And so I think we've kind of hit that pretty well. We do take them into that uncomfortable area in the scenes that you've just seen, but we take them back out and they have more fun afterwards, and we really process through the feelings that they're going through too.
I think with the current media attention this type of problem has received recently, I think it's important for a lot of children to understand the importance of a serious issue like this. And I think the fact that it has received a lot of media attention really opens the door for us to just let kids know that there is something like this that is happening, and it's okay for them to let it out. It's okay for them to tell someone who they trust that if it has happened to them, that we're here to let them know that it happens, and it's okay for you to talk about it with someone.
I feel like this is kind of shocking to me as, a teenager, but a lot of these kids who have, had abusive relationships and stuff don't realize the abuse is wrong, and they think it's normal, and so it's kind of shocking to see them, it is very awkward doing these skits, but it's kind of shocking to see them, realize and see that it's not okay. It's a problem.
It makes me upset that people would hurt children, that would take control of children, because they're so young, they're so naive, they don't really know what's going on, and adults do know what's going on, but they still proceed, and I think it's really sick and sad.
I have to apologize to Julie Wermers, who is the executive director of CASA, the court-appointed special advocate organization in our community and our state, who gave us a nice interview, and we just don't have time for this package, and I apologize to you, Julie. Thank you for being there, and thank you to CASA for your part. But we've got some questions we want to hit. The child is bullied by peers and teachers and adults. How should it be handled? Bullying. A child is bullied.
It's a strong subject matter lately, and it's important to know if there's any policies within the setting of the school or the school board or the school system, and go through those channels to do the reporting. Certainly you want the child to be able to feel comfortable and safe to report that, whether it be to the teachers or parents or whoever else might listen in that community.
Right. Tony, people grow up being bullies. How do we deal with bullies? I mean, what as an individual, and what as a teacher, or how do we handle, how do we get them to not be bullies?
Well, you put them in jail. That's one place. I mean, there are social and legal ramifications for bullying, but we also know that it happens a lot behind the scenes, and sometimes there's just so much control we can try to expect that that's there. Awareness is the big way to shine light on the problem.
Right. How do we teach our kids not to be bullies?
I was to say, to not be bullies and not to be victims of bullies is to really empower our kids and say, you can say no to that. No one has a right to treat you badly, and so you don't have to take it. I think it's easier sometimes to stop on that end. I think it's very difficult but bullies as children certainly need help as much as the child victim. But we really need to send a loud and clear message to all children. It's not okay.
Yeah, I remember being beat up trying to protect another guy, and as soon as these bullies, the kid, he ran home, and I was left facing the three guys who were bullies, and I got beat up. And if you were watching that show, you guys, here's a caller, was sexually abused as a child, didn't want to say anything, had beatings, not spankings, felt guilty, wondered if it happened to all children, why would abuse, the abused turn to abusing? That's the question. Abuse.
First of all, for this person, that's one of the reasons it can continue for a long time, is the victim doesn't understand that this doesn't happen to all children.
They often feel isolated and alone, or that no one would understand, or they're told not to tell anybody, or they're threatened to not tell, or they see someone else in the family that's physically abused, or they hurt the dog or something along that lines, which keeps them from reporting.
So who do you report?
Everybody's uncle does
Who
this.
can you report? My uncle is abusing me, my father is abusing me. Who do I report to? And the answer is, Tony?
Well, trusted people, and hopefully your family doctor would be a good place to start. Teachers, perhaps another parent, and even religious and ministers. I mean, and priests. They are all very, very helpful.
And it's important for children to understand it's okay to keep telling until someone understands what they're saying, and that someone says, "Yes, I will help you."
And find somebody you can trust and go to them. Endured past abuse is now a recluse. Wonders why no one has ever said to her, "It was not your fault."
That's really sad.
Boy, that's
no
a tough
one.
Isn't that a huge
I'll
point?
tell her that it wasn't her fault.
It was not your fault.
It is absolutely not your fault.
Here's 4 people telling you that part. Okay, we've got a minute to wrap up. Final comment, Nancy.
This is an adult problem. We as a society need to recognize it, and we need to support our children both individually and in the bigger picture. We need to make sure that all organizations who deal with children recognize this and can work to prevent it.
Wallace.
And I want to make certain that we keep the focus on the perpetrator and not the victim, that we don't blame the victim or that the victim did something wrong. The focus needs to be on the perpetrator was wrong what they did, and that they need to be held accountable and responsible for that abuse.
Well, and I also would say we can help. Find some help.
Yes.
Help that perpetrator. The perpetrator's a human being, and we need to do what we can to help that person as well. Tony.
Healthy children become healthy adults, and we love to see the innocence of youth, and we need to protect them and be there and let them know that we are there for them.
Very good. We, as a whole society, need to provide our children with as safe of an environment as we possibly can. As author Pearl S. Buck said, if our American way of life fails the child, it fails us all. It will not be perfect, but if we maintain a proper vigilance and take the responsibility to watch over all of our children, to give them the voice that is so easily drowned out, we will get closer. As Mother Teresa taught, there is more hunger for love and appreciation in this world than for bread. Be sure to join us this Thursday, 2 nights from now, right here at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain, when our regular on-call program looks at influenza and lung disease with our guest Lon Keitlinger, who is the state epidemiologist and a pulmonologist from Sioux Falls. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay healthy out there, people.
Signs or effects of abuse, you may contact the South Dakota Department of Social Services, the National CASA Court-Appointed Special Advocates, the South Dakota CASA, South Dakota Voices for Children, the National Foster Parent Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families, South Dakota Department of Criminal Investigation, or contact your local law enforcement agency listed in your local phone book. All of these contacts will be listed on the On Call TV Facebook site.
Funding for this program is provided in part by
Avera is a proud sponsor of On Call on South Dakota Public Television.
And by the South Dakota Foundation for Medical Care, the Medicare Quality Improvement Organization for South Dakota. Additional funding provided by Dakota Care, the Brookings Health System, Regional Health, the South Dakota American College of Physicians, and Swiftel Communications. Closed captioning for On Call is provided by the generous support of Avera, the Brookings Health System, and Fishback Financial Corporation.